The water was warm against my skin, the afternoon sun casting golden ripples across the pool's surface. I floated on my back, letting my eyes drift shut, listening to nothing but the faint hum of insects in the distance and the soft splash of water moving around me. It was quiet, too quiet. Kyle had gone inside almost 20 minutes ago to grab more drinks, promising to be right back. I told him I'd stay in the water, but now, with the silence stretching on, I was starting to wonder if I should just get out. I kicked lazily, pushing myself toward the pool's edge, but before I could reach it, the sliding door opened, a slow, deliberate sound. Not rushed, not casual. I turned, wiping water from my face, blinking against the glare of the sun, and then I saw him, Mr. Carter. Kyle's dad stood just outside the patio, his stance relaxed but unreadable. He wasn't dressed like someone expecting company. Just a simple white t-shirt and dark sweatpants, barefoot like he'd just come from inside. The contrast between him and the bright summer afternoon made him seem out of place. His gaze was steady, watching me in a way that made my stomach tighten. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of how alone I was. "Kyle went inside," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. Mr. Carter nodded but didn't look away. "I know." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. The water clung to me as I moved toward the edge, gripping the warm tile. "I was just about to get out," I muttered, half expecting him to turn away, to leave, to do anything that made this moment feel normal. But he didn't. Instead, he took a slow step forward. "You're a strong swimmer," he said, his voice calm but weighted. It wasn't a question. I forced out a small laugh. Yeah, I guess." Silence. The air felt heavier, the heat of the sun suddenly suffocating. I could feel the way he was looking at me, something careful, something measured. Then he crouched down at the edge of the pool, resting his forearms on his knees. Close enough now that I could see the faint creases around his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. Close enough that I could hear his breath. "Jaden, right?" My stomach twisted. He knew my name. Of course he did. I'd been to this house more times than I could count. But something about the way he said it, deliberate, slow, like he had been holding on to it for a while, like he had been waiting to say it. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The air was thick with heat, clinging to my skin as I remained in the water, trying to ignore the way Mr. Carter's presence unsettled me. He hadn't moved from the spot at the edge of the pool, his gaze steady, unreadable. Kyle should have been back by now. I felt a strange urge to fill the silence, to say something, anything, to break whatever this was between us. But before I could, he spoke again. "You come around a lot." His voice was casual, but there was something beneath it, something measured. I swallowed, nodding. "Yeah, Kyle and I have been friends since middle school." He hummed, his fingers absently tracing the edge of the tile. "Funny, I never really noticed you before." A strange feeling curled in my stomach at those words. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just looked away, pretending to focus on the shifting ripples in the water. "Did you always swim like that?" he asked after a beat. I furrowed my brows. "Like what?" His lips twitched, almost like he was amused. "Like you're part of the water. Controlled, smooth. It's rare to see someone so comfortable in it." Something about the way he said it sent an unexpected shiver through me. "It's nothing," I muttered, suddenly self-conscious. "I've just always liked swimming." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Kyle told me you wanted to be a swimmer professionally." I tensed. "I used to." "Not anymore?" I shook my head, my throat tightening. "It's complicated." Mr. Carter studied me, his gaze too sharp, too knowing. "Things usually are." His words hung between us, heavy, stretching the moment too thin. I hated how my body reacted to him. I turned toward the steps, deciding I'd had enough of this conversation, of the tension coiling inside me. I should head inside. Just as I started to move, he stood up. Wait! I froze mid-step, looking up at him. His expression remained unreadable, but his hand extended, palm open. Come here. I stared at it. My pulse hammered. This was strange. This was weird. But I stepped forward anyway. I barely made it to the shallow end when his fingers wrapped gently around my wrist, stopping me. His touch was firm, grounding but not forceful. I swallowed hard. What are you doing? His eyes flickered to mine, his grip lingering for a second too long before he let go. You almost slipped. I exhaled shakily. I'm fine. Good, he said. But there was something about the way he looked at me, like he knew exactly what he was doing to me, and yet he wasn't stopping. I stepped past him, feeling his presence like static against my skin as I grabbed my towel and draped it over my shoulders. Kyle finally came back, grinning as he pushed open the door with 2 soda cans in hand. You're still out here, he laughed, tossing me one. I forced a smile, my fingers tightening around the cold metal. Mr. Carter stepped back, his expression slipping into something neutral, something easy. I was just heading in. Kyle didn't seem to notice the shift in the air, but I did. I felt it, and I knew in that moment that something had changed. The house was quiet that night, the kind of silence that settled deep in the walls, pressing in like a hell breath. I lay awake in the guest room, the sheets cool against my skin, the dim glow from the pool casting shifting patterns across the ceiling. Kyle had fallen asleep hours ago, his snores muffled by the wall between us. I should have been sleeping too, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment by the pool, his hand around my wrist, the way he had looked at me like he knew something I didn't. I exhaled sharply, turning onto my side, trying to will the thoughts away. But then, a noise, soft, a shuffle against the hardwood floor just outside my door. My breath caught. I listened, heart hammering, waiting to hear it again. Silence. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was the house settling, or Kyle shifting in his bed. But then, the doorknob turned. Slow, deliberate. I sat up, every nerve in my body firing at once. The door didn't open all the way, just a crack, just enough for the dim hallway light to spill in. And then I saw him, Mr. Carter, standing there, watching me. A chill ran down my spine. My throat felt tight, my skin prickling under his gaze. He didn't move, didn't speak. Neither did I. The air between us was thick, charged with something I couldn't name. I should have said something. What are you doing? Is something wrong? Why are you here? But my voice wouldn't come. His hand lifted slightly, fingertips grazing the edge of the doorframe, like he was debating something. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark, unreadable. And then, just as slowly as he had opened it, he shut the door. Softly, deliberately. I sat frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. What the hell was that? I stared at the door, waiting, expecting something to happen. But nothing did. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Sleep never came. And when morning arrived, I wasn't sure if it had really happened at all. The next morning, the house felt different. Not in any obvious way. Kyle was still Kyle, laughing at his own jokes over breakfast, oblivious to anything that wasn't his phone or the leftover pancakes his dad had made. The sun still poured through the kitchen windows, painting everything in warm, golden light. But I had changed, or maybe just the way I saw things had. Mr. Carter sat at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper like nothing had happened, like he hadn't stood at my door last night, silent, watching, before disappearing like a ghost. I felt his presence before I saw him, the air in the room shifting when he turned the page of his paper, his fingers tapping idly against the tabletop. I hadn't slept. I kept telling myself I had imagined it. Maybe the door hadn't opened. Maybe my mind had made it all up in the haze of exhaustion and paranoia. But deep down, I knew better. And I knew he knew, too. I grabbed a glass of water from the sink, keeping my movements casual, controlled. I refused to look at him, but my body was hyper-aware of every shift in his chair, every time he turned another page. I took a sip, forcing myself to focus on the sounds of Kyle's voice as he scrolled through his phone. "Dude, we should hit the lake later," Kyle said, grinning. "Maybe take the kayaks out?" I nodded, keeping my eyes on my drink. "Yeah, sure." I felt it before it happened. The moment Mr. Carter looked up. Not just a glance. A pause. A deliberate, weighted look that sent a cold shiver down my spine. I kept my breathing steady, setting my glass down carefully. Kyle hadn't noticed. Of course he hadn't. But I did. And when I finally dared to lift my gaze, just for a second, Mr. Carter was watching me. Expression unreadable. The same way he had last night. I gripped the edge of the counter, my pulse hammering. Kyle laughed at something on his screen, completely oblivious. "Dad, you in? We could pack some beers." "I've got work," Mr. Carter cut in smoothly, folding the newspaper. He pushed back from the table, standing up in one fluid motion. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound making me flinch. And then he walked past me, close enough that I caught the scent of his cologne, the faintest brush of air as he moved. I didn't move, didn't breathe. He stopped just at the doorway, his voice lower than before. "You boys be careful out there." And then he was gone. The air in the room was still thick, but Kyle didn't seem to notice. I exhaled slowly, gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. Kyle was already back to scrolling, completely unaware. "Dude, grab your stuff. We leave in 10. I forced a nod, but my hands were still shaking. The lake stretched out in front of us, its surface smooth like glass, the afternoon heat making everything hazy. Kyle had already paddled ahead, laughing as he splashed water with his oar, completely lost in the moment. I wasn't. I kept replaying the morning, the way Mr. Carter had looked at me, the way he had walked past, close enough to feel, but not close enough to touch. Like he was waiting, like he knew something I didn't. I dug my paddle into the water, the movement sharp, controlled, trying to shake the thought away. It wasn't working. Kyle shouted something, but the words barely registered, because my phone buzzed. I stilled, adjusting my grip on the paddle as I glanced down at the screen. A text from an unknown number. My stomach twisted. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. "Did you sleep well?" I stared. My fingers tightened around the phone. The text wasn't signed. No name. No details. Just those 4 words. But I didn't need to ask who it was from. I felt it, like a slow burn, crawling under my skin, like a door left half open in the middle of the night. I swallowed hard, glancing back at the shore, where the house sat nestled among the trees. Somewhere inside, Mr. Carter was waiting, and I had no idea what he was waiting for. I locked my phone. Kyle laughed, splashing more water. "Dude, you good?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't notice the way my hands were shaking, or the way my heart was racing. I turned back toward the lake, staring at the endless stretch of water ahead. But no matter how far I paddled, I knew I couldn't escape what had already started. And deep down, I wasn't sure if I wanted to.